as we begin, we were kind of, where we are in the book is kind of the second half of the first section. That's kind of where we are, kind of. Next week, so for like this Sunday, we're pulling from section 2, which is the Pilgrims, Activists, and Artists chapters. So there's 3 chapters. So there's like, it's broken up into 4 sections. And then every week will just be a section after that. And so I really enjoyed reading the section about the Pilgrims, Activists, and Artists. Like that's like in that part of there. So if you have read or anything like that, has anything kind of stood out to you so far that you thought was interesting or anything like that?
I would just found it astounding at that restaurant in, I think it was Peru, where this order of women served all meals at night, and then worked all day to helping young mothers and so forth. I mean, and that's what they did. They just served people every day. You know? I mean, and they're happy with it. Then they bring up a little bit, very little Christianity in it. It's amazing.
It is. Like, it kind of shows, it shows, I'm encouraged by stories like that because it kind of shows a faith that is like, that you have so much confidence in what Jesus has done for you that you can just give stuff away, type of thing. And that's kind of cool. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Is there anyone else have anything? So I'm going to ask. So they have a bunch of questions. Here's what this book does to you. They go 8 minutes, and then they have 6 questions. like that. Like that. That's.
I think that's supposed to be if you're sitting by yourself.
Probably. So we're just going to go right into the middle of like a kind of a deeper question. Is, as you consider the way Christians interact with people who are not Christians, what attitudes, words, or actions might reveal a self-serving motivation rather than a motivation that is a love for people? Does that make any sense? Yeah. So what, are there things that kind of reveal a self-serving motivation rather than a love for people? Have you seen anything like that?
Maybe occasionally.
Occasionally, yeah.
Just the general attitude of I'm right, you're wrong.
Oh yeah. Like that's a big one.
Our pastor one time said, if you knew someone that was gay, in a loving way, tell them they're wrong.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would just be a non-starter right there.
Yeah. I won't get into it.
Good. Go ahead. Go ahead.
We have to avoid being
Andy Stanley. Is everyone familiar with Andy Stanley? Andy Stanley is Charles Stanley's son. He also has a massive church in Atlanta, and so he said something very. And Carol, this is your fault. This is why I'm bringing it up. Like I just need to place blame when this goes completely off the rails. But he said something that I thought was very astute this week, and it's kind of gone all over the place. But he was talking about people with homosexuality, and he says, like, you think about those people and how they are in our churches. And he said the amount of faith that those people have, that knows that they're not accepted, that knows that people probably wish they weren't there, knows that they can't do this, that they can't be part of this, they can't do that, and yet they're still come week after week. And he goes, that's a faith greater than what I have. And I was like, that has been like wildfire. This week, like, all people love it, people hate it, like it's all over the thing. But I think he's saying something kind of interesting there. So like but that's kind of, it's hard to tell someone. Like, one thing we were talking about with this book is that you got to show someone love first. And once they know that you love them, then you can say hard things. You know, like that's the thing. Like, you know, I can say things to good friends of mine that, well, it's like my friend Mark. Like, he and I have no problem telling each other that we're complete idiots about what we're doing, because we've got 15 years on the back burner, you know? Like
My
that.
mother could do that to me anytime.
Yeah.
We didn't have the same mother.
Yeah, we didn't have the same. It's a good job.
We had an experience, our son's very close friend from high school, a fella, during college transitioned to a woman. And our son was home for Christmas, and she lived up in the Twin Cities area, and she was coming down, and he's like, "Is it all right if I have Addie over?" I'm like, "Of course." He goes, "You know, she transitioned." I'm like, "That's absolutely fine," you know, and we had such a great time and conversation. It's the same person that we knew and loved in high school when he was a man, but I think of all of the hurt that she's gone through to make that drastic decision. Totally, and it's like, she doesn't need judgment. I can respect her and call her she. I can invite her into our home and just let her know, you're welcome here. You can be here. You're not I've never talked to someone who has transitioned, and it was very good feeling to talk and like, why'd you choose that? Why did, you know, and she's like, ask me anything. She says, I'm open, just ask me anything. If you call me a he, that's fine. You know, and it was just a good conversation to have. And just, I don't agree with those choices, but that's all right. You know, it opens a door if something ever would, you know, that.
That's exactly what the video is about, by the way, like, which is great. It's great, but this happened last night too in the other group. Like that's all of a sudden we all started talking about, I'm like, well, this is exactly what the video is about. But that's, you know, and it takes that showing love to people, you know, like, because you had an inbuilt relationship with that person for years, you know, before any questions were asked. Because if you invited that person over and then you invited me over and they're like, here's our pastor.
Right.
Like, that would be a completely different evening. like that's, you know, like it would just be clam up. We'd be talking about the weather. Like that's, even though I have no idea what I would be, there's some assumption.
But they'd be judging you.
Yeah, they'd be judging me.
It's a judgment on him.
Yeah. Like that's, and just the action of having the pastor there.
Right.
You know, like that.
They have planned for me.
Yeah. And so that just that action, it'd be judging me. Definitely.
Do you ever worry about what they say, judgmental wise, you know, with some bad words?
That,
when they're in your presence, they go,
oh my gosh, all the time.
Be my first thought.
Well, like that's like bad words. Like it's like that's everyone here is pretty good, like, about it. So before you feel like I'm casting judgment on you, when people invite us over for like dinner or something like that, we can tell when you're lying to us. Like that.
The Bible's out on the table.
Like, and we're just like all right, like, so, and we can tell when people are just like comfortable with themselves, you know, like that. That's over there, but yeah, it happened a lot. And when we were in Arkansas, that we'd go over to someone's house. You know, everything's just, you know, of course you cleaned up your house. I have to do that before you guys show up at the house. You know, that's one thing. That's the active lie that we all do to each other. Like that, is we clean up the house and all. But it's, but just, you know, like trying to like, oh yeah, we always pray before dinner, or, you know, so like it's like easy there, easy. Like just live your life. That's all we want. You know, like I don't expect perfection, and people try to get it. It's funny. It's funny, but
I always had to laugh at when you go to somebody's house and they know that you're a regular churchgoer or a devoted Christian, and you walk in and they're claiming that they are too, and you see the dust-covered Bible.
I have a few of those. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's plenty. I have several Bibles with dust covered, but the one I use every day, actually.
But yeah, like there's just little things like that. It's funny. So this is, as we watch the video here, we can think about this question: what are some attitudes, words, or actions that have the potential to reach through the defenses of non-Christians and make a positive news impact, like a good news impact? So let's go ahead and watch the video. Remember, it's 20 minutes long, and I enjoyed this one.
I just thought Christians were really pathetic. I mean, I'm sorry. At some point, I guess I'm saying I was threatened by some of them. And all that made me wonder is, what are you guys so afraid of? Bring it on. Bring it on. And eventually, the Lord did put a pastor in my life who did bring it on, but not in the way I had anticipated.
If you joined this study hoping you would get a formula for evangelism, well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. There are people who are far more skilled than I am in talking about their faith or in evangelism techniques. To tell you the truth, many of those techniques simply don't work in a post-Christian environment. What can we do about the problem we talked about in the last session? I want to go deeper to some of the most basic commands that Jesus gave us. Love is by far the most important. Jesus set forth love as the essence of what we're supposed to be about, to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, he said, and then to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. In his great chapter on love in 1 Corinthians 13, the Apostle Paul said that without love, nothing else we do really matters, no matter how impressive or spiritual or well-intentioned. Listen to what he says. If I speak in the tongue of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all that I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. You can't get much clearer than that. Many people are suspicious of Christians because they see us as pushers of what we believe. They think we care about them mainly as targets. We have a hidden agenda to get them converted. I know how I react when, say, a Jehovah's Witness comes to my door. My defenses go up right away. And that's how a lot of people feel if I try to talk to them about my faith. They feel judged or targeted, as if I'm trying to sell them something that they don't really want. On the other hand, if my primary motivation is love, that cuts right through defenses. I listen to someone, identify with their need or maybe their pain, and truly care for them, whether or not they show any interest in my faith. Love covers a multitude of sins, wrote Peter, or as Eugene Peterson paraphrased it in The Message, love makes up for practically everything. I've learned from the example of Dr. Francis Collins, a man I have gotten to know personally. Collins is a fascinating character. He was raised on a farm in Virginia surrounded by hippies. In fact, the songwriter Bob Dylan celebrated his 18th birthday on the farm. It was that kind of place. Collins's parents homeschooled him, and they must have done a good job because he went on to earn a PhD from Yale, and then he switched fields and trained as a medical doctor. He became interested in genetics, identified the gene for cystic fibrosis and several other diseases, and he was eventually named director of one of the most ambitious science projects in history, the Human Genome Project. He now heads the National Institutes of Health with 20,000 employees. Francis Collins is unique. He plays a mean guitar, and his guitar is inlaid with the DNA double helix design in mother of pearl, and just for kicks he rides a motorcycle. He's also known as an outspoken Christian, rather unusual in the scientific community. His book, The Language of God, tells of his spiritual journey. Collins knows about hostility from post-Christians. He's engaged in public debates with prominent atheists such as Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, who have sometimes made snide remarks questioning how a serious scientist can possibly believe the Bible. But Dr. Collins's credentials are impeccable, and he's received many awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I would have to say, though, that of all of his many achievements, the one that impresses me most is this, and that's the way he shows grace to his opponents. When Collins visits Oxford University, he goes out of his way to have tea with Richard Dawkins, who's one of his strongest detractors. And when Christopher Hitchens contracted esophageal cancer, Collins called him on the phone and said, "As director of the National Institutes of Health, I happen to know of many treatments that are still in the experimental stage. I'd be happy to come and discuss them with you and your wife." After that, he spent hours with the Hitchens family going over their options and lining up treatment. Christopher Hitchens chronicled the last 2 years of his life in a regular column for Vanity Fair magazine, and his tone mellowed toward the end. He praised Francis Collins. He wrote about the doctor's Christian faith. He even quoted C.S. Lewis. Hitchens did not have a deathbed conversion. In fact, he said, if you ever hear that a conversion came about, it's because he was suffering from dementia. Hitchens did, however, experience something of the grace of God. Nowhere does Jesus commission us to convert every person in the world. He knew that would not happen. Even so, in the Sermon on the Mount, he asked us to show love to our enemies. For in doing so, he said, you will be children of the Most High, because God, the Father, is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. In other words, the more we love our enemies, the more we resemble God. Hebrews 12:15 states a goal that I try to keep in front of me. It says, see to it that no one misses the grace of God. Francis Collins made sure that happened, even for someone who opposed and sometimes even mocked him. Now it's time to hear from Rosaria Butterfield. Her story is quite different from Francis Collins. She was a radical feminist and taught gender studies and what she called queer theory at a major university. And she viewed Christians as unenlightened bigots. She wrote articles against them, in the process attracting plenty of hate mail from Christians who did not show grace. One person, though, treated her with love, and that made all the difference.
In 1992, I was recently hired in a tenure-track position at Syracuse University. And I moved to Syracuse with my first lesbian partner. And I immediately started studying the religious right from a lesbian feminist perspective. And in part, I really wanted to understand why Christians were were waging a war against me. I remember for years Gay Pride Day being just a day to hang out, with your friends in the park, all of a sudden to Gay Pride Day being a day when you needed security, when you were thinking about, oh, should the children come? And some of the placards that Christians held up at Gay Pride Day were searing. Well, Promise Keepers rented out our stadium. And, this was an enormous group. Everything was shut down for the day. I had been reading some of their material, and I thought this was outrageous. I thought it was I thought they were dangerous, stupid, and I felt like it was necessary to educate my community about what they believed and really what the logical consequences were of their ideas. And so I wrote what I thought was just a small little article in the Syracuse Post-Standard. I didn't think twice about it, sent it off, and 2 days later, it came out as a full-page editorial. And so it went big, fast. Immediately, the hate mail and the fan mail started coming in. So I've got a Xerox box on one side for hate mail, Xerox box on one side for fan mail. Then I received this one letter from Ken Smith, who at that point was the pastor of the Syracuse Reformed Presbyterian Church. It was a kind and inquiring letter, and yet he completely disagreed with my conclusions. He disagreed with my conclusions, but he didn't seem to disagree with me. It was a complex letter, and I just didn't know what to do with it. And it sort of haunted me for a week. And the author, Ken, said, call me and we can meet to talk about this. So I called Ken up, and we had a delightful conversation. And again, he was, the word that always comes to mind with Ken is that he was disarming. He's supposed to be this kind of patriarchal Christian bad guy, and yet we have so many things in common. And at the end of that phone call, he invited me to come to his house for a meal. I loved that first meeting at Ken and Floyd's house, and I felt very strongly that we could be friends. But a lot was hanging on what the goodbye was going to be like, because I was all ready for the evangelical goodbye, which is, here's the gospel, say the sinner's prayer, and can I pick you up for church this Lord's Day? And so as I was at the door and Ken and Floyd are saying bye, hope to see you again, there was none of that. And therefore I knew that it was safe to be friends with Ken. On Thursday nights at my house, I always open my home to anybody in the gay and lesbian community. That's something good for pastors and professors to do if you think you know the people you represent. And Ken actually came once or twice just to get to know my friends. No other reason. He knew I didn't need a long, drawn-out political rally on sexuality or a kind of moralizing hand slap on what I wrote in the newspaper, or and obviously I gave him a lot of material to be derailed by, right? But Ken is very patient, and Ken believes in friendship evangelism. He prays for opportunities to be friends, and friendship costs time. It costs sometimes safety, but he believed that, the ground zero of evangelism is hospitality. That's love of the stranger. Well, at a certain point, when you feel the Lord moving in your life, the Bible tells us that we just have to do two things. We have to repent, and we have to believe. And repentance it's bittersweet, because we love our sin, we know our sin, it doesn't feel like sin to us. And so in a moment of lucidity, a bit like an Alzheimer's patient who hands over the car keys, I felt like I needed to hand over my ability to interpret matters of sin and grace for myself to the Lord himself through the Bible. And so I was at Ken and Floyd's house, and we gathered together, and we got on our knees and prayed. We always got on our knees and prayed at Ken and Floyd's house, which was a funny thing for me to do as an old runner, but we got on our knees and we prayed, and we all prayed. And it was really that moment that I responded to the Lord's calling me into the kingdom for real. But it was truly just the loving, non-reactionary, non-frightened, non-moralizing group of, conservative Bible-believing Christians who were willing to just meet me where I was and to know that there's a difference between acceptance and approval. You can accept people right where they are without having capitulated for the gospel. And so it was through that love and the power of the Holy Spirit to draw people to Himself that by God's grace I get to be here. One question is, how can we reach out to people who are just radically different than we are? People maybe whom we perceive to wear their sin patterns right on their shirt collars, and it's almost glaring to us. And we need to realize that, no matter what's glaring about a person, you really don't know that person. You really don't know the biggest sin in that person's life. Please do not presume that you know that. Let people articulate themselves to you. The gift of time is one of the priciest things you can give to people. Let them tell you who they are. I have described before my conversion as a train wreck, but it was because of one person's friendship, faithful friendship, first to the Lord Jesus, of course, and then to me and others. It was because of the time that this one person was willing to spend, and because of the patience and the fearlessness of maybe what other Christians were saying. I don't know. He knew exactly where I needed the Lord's balm. He didn't develop some weird program about how to minister to the lesbian next door, because that's not who I was to him. I was a soul that will last forever. And he impressed upon me that there are two things that will last forever: the Word of God and the souls of people. And he treated me as a soul bearer. And he modeled for me that I needed to start taking stock of that myself.
Rosaria Butterfield tells the complete story in her book, The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Love won her over. The love of a pastor's family and then a church whose members surrounded her and gave her the time she needed for her bias against Christians to soften. At first, Rosaria feared that becoming a Christian would mean abandoning causes that she cared about, things like academic freedom, women's rights, human rights, justice. Instead, she found that her new faith gave her a solid foundation for those causes. She found common ground with Christians who accepted her even when she didn't fit the mold. Now she devotes herself to caring for foster children from difficult backgrounds and with special needs, some of whom she has adopted. I want to conclude this session by mentioning two ways in which we can reach out to those around us. The first is to awaken a thirst that is already there. As a young doctor, Francis Collins was doing well in his career, unaware of any latent thirst. Then an elderly woman patient who was very sick awakened that thirst. She asked him one day, "What do you believe about God and what might await me after my death?" Suddenly, Dr. Collins realized he had never given such important ideas a single thought. Her question sent him on a spiritual search that resulted in his conversion. Rosaria Butterfield was initially resistant to faith, aggressively post-Christian. But as she spent some time among a community who truly cared for her, she realized by contrast how confused and broken her world really was. Rosaria was quite literally loved into the kingdom of God. As she put it, the voice of God sang a sanguine love song in the rubble of my world. By seeing to it that no one misses the grace of God, we can awaken a thirst that is already there. The second way we can reach out is to look for what I call hinge moments. Those times when a person may be open to a spiritual search. Many churches have ministries to the homeless or to people in hospitals and prisons because suffering and despair automatically present such hinge moments. I mentioned several other examples in my book in hopes that they will spark your own ideas. The internet wedding pastor who meets with young couples at a time of great joy and explores why they may want a pastor or God involved. The most unlikely ministry run by a Southern Baptist pastor who operates a private cigar club of all things, not because he advocates smoking, but because he's learned that when men open up about things that matter most, there's often a cigar involved. He and other counselors staff the club in case the men want to talk about a failing marriage or a teenager on drugs or whatever their deepest concern is. Then there's the woman I met in Toronto, Canada, who feels called to express grace to telephone marketers. You know, those irritating people who call just as you take your first bite of dinner and proceed to deliver their spiel for 5 minutes nonstop before you can tell them you're not interested. I tell you, my hat is off to this woman. That is the graduate school of grace. But as she explains, these people get cursed at and hear phones slammed down all day long. When someone treats them with compassion and grace, why, that's a hinge moment, to be sure. As you discuss this session together, maybe you can come up with your own creative ways to express grace at such hinge moments.
I thought so. The interesting question around that video is, we'll get to the interesting question, is when you consider the Christopher Hitchens and the Dr. Collins example and all that stuff, would you consider Dr. Collins to be successful in extending grace and proclaiming the good news to Christopher Hitchens?
I never heard of him.
No, they were talking about him in the video. That was
I saw that, but
yeah.
He's famous. I never heard of him.
Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, I have. Like, he's in. Yeah.
What's his first name?
The Dr. Collins.
Francis.
Francis. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's. Yeah, I remember you said it in there. I couldn't remember like this. And so he. And I mean, you were kind of around that field, so like kind of a.
Yeah, I knew his name. I didn't know the other story about him, but I knew.
Yeah. So that's. So like, do you think he was successful in proclaiming, from what the information that we have, here, in proclaiming the good news to Christopher Hitchens, the atheist?
Even though he didn't convert, is that why they're saying that? Mm-hmm. Because we don't know. I would say yes. He showed love, and grace, and loved that person, for who they were.
Yeah.
Well, the person got closer to believing than he ever would have if it hadn't been for him.
Yeah. Well, and it said that he started like treating the faith with more grace, even quoting some C.S. Lewis and stuff like that. But they had the dementia line, which was a funny line. Yeah, Fred.
I don't know about Rosario either. Mm-hmm. But the question is, did she continue her lesbian tendencies, or did she stop that? They never said.
So they don't.
In the book they do, though.
Yeah, they do.
She's married to a pastor now.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I read that. I have
It's in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the book.
Yeah.
It's in the book, Fred. That's So like that's it actually.
I didn't hear the answer, didn't she?
Oh, it's in the book. She married a pastor. Yeah. And so I can hear your whispers, Midge.
I'll be more careful now.
That's what a lot of guys say, though, meet a lesbian woman, well, she hasn't experienced me yet, that's what.
Oh, yeah. That's a height of pride right there. That's a height of pride. But so here's what I think the interesting question is do you think the couple who loved Rosaria Butterfield was more successful in sharing the good news than Dr. Collins? That's the interesting question. What do you think?
You have to define success in order to do that.
Well, that's what we're doing. Like, what do you think? What do you think, Cheryl? What does successful
I
mean?
think they did what was supposed to happen as far as showing grace and love.
Yeah.
And the result was up to God and up to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. I think that's a good answer. Like, you do what you do, and you leave the rest up to Jesus.
And let it be.
Yeah, like that's.
You can't force beyond,
Yeah, like you can only control yourself. That's counseling 101 with people.
That sounds really Lutheran too.
It's super Lutheran. Like that's.
I think of maybe some of my more Baptist-oriented friends watching this video, they'd say, "Oh, she gave her life to Jesus then, and everything was wonderful." And it may not be.
Yeah, Care Bears and rainbows, right? Like that's
Hindsight is the thing that will tell you.
Yeah.
If things happened up well or not.
And maybe not even in our lifetime, like with Francis Collins. Those other people, he was ministering to Hawkins, but there's other people seeing that, his family, the staff at the hospice and all that. So you don't know that ripple. Like, wow, there was a Christian man that he just loved a guy that he didn't agree with, And I think that in churches that I've been to, small church in Minnesota, we got to go out there and we got to knock door to door so more people are coming to our church. And it is, the success is how many people have you, not converted, but how many people have you influenced to come to church? And it wasn't not, we're doing it because we just love these people. We're doing it. The success was the numbers game.
The success was the numbers.
Yeah.
There's different reasons. I think of the Nelson and Carrie story. Our neighbors across the street, unmarried, moved in, unchurched, and once they have Sunday afternoon, he asked me, "I see you go out every Sunday morning. Where do you go?" And I told him, "Oh, okay." That was that. We were friends. We talked. It's not me. Somebody else.
It's all right. You can continue going.
Telemarketer.
And
Yeah.
And eventually, they said, well, maybe there's something to it. Went to church at Sunlight down the street. Then later on, stopped going there and started going to St. Lucie Catholic Church. And now he is the guy who teaches adults coming into the church the catechism.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just because we talked. That's all. And became friends.
And you didn't pronounce the done. You didn't pronounce him done on that one encounter, too. Like that's kind of what this thing. And I think part of this study is helping us slow down and what we call success, and that we're kind of called to give people love. We talked about it extensively on Sunday. About the love, like if you don't show someone love, you're just noise. There's been a lot of times in my own life when I've been just noise, just trying to make something happen. I've been just noise. And that's we have that plus Jesus talking about loving your enemies as well. That's all part of it here. Another thing we talked about. I have two things I want us to get into with the in the Bible stuff today. One is the story of the prodigal son, and let's see. We may go a little long, but I think it'd be good to. So we'll listen to that story of the prodigal son here. Let's see here. So we share screens, and I get my supervision out and look at which one I need to share. So here we go. So we'll listen to this story, and we'll kind of say a few words about it.
A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost, and is found.' And they began to be merry. Now, his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf.' But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore, his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered and said to his father, 'Lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found.'"
Okay. So,
He also
oh no, I didn't hit the button in time. Hold on. Okay, so in that story, what kind of stands out to you in that story? What are the things that kind of stand out to you?
That the prodigal son repented.
The prodigal son repented. So I think there's three characters in here. And you got the son, the younger son, who goes off and all those things. Like, yeah, so, and he repents and he goes back. Yeah, yeah. Like, what
I
else?
always thought it was, for me, because I've been in the church my whole life, it's more for me a story about the older son.
Mm-hmm.
How to, he's saying, I've done all these things, I've checked the boxes, I've kept your commandments, and da-da-da-da. And that's not what it's about. It's about love.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for me, it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah. And so you have the second character there,
Yeah.
which is that older brother. This story I've always enjoyed this story. This is one of like Jesus' great parables. Like, it really is. And this story completely changed for me once with the same lens that you're looking at it through, like that I received that same lens, where it's like, oh man, like I'm not always that younger one, like that. I'm oftentimes have been the older one and angry when other people have received grace, like that's, and I talked about it during the confession on Sunday, but that there's that party going on and Jesus just ends the story. We have no idea what the older brother does, which I think it's inviting us into that story. It's like, do you want to go into the party or do you want to stay out? Like that's, and that's kind of interesting. Did anyone else notice anything else that was interesting to them?
I wonder if the story would change if the older son had a lot of troubles in his life following that.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like kind of looking at the way that story is written, yeah. Like if he kind of just went off the deep end type of thing, and is there continued grace being shown by the Father type of thing?
How about that grace in action?
Grace in action, yeah.
Love, compassion.
And I think you have the Father in there too. That's that other character, and I think this story really lends for it to be like God is the Father, in that, like, that's obvious, all those things. But I think it also brings us in a little bit where we can see ourselves in each of these characters, where we're the place where forgiveness can happen. We're that older brother who's done everything right, everything right, and yet isn't doing anything right, or even the younger one who has gone off and needed to do my own thing, and I don't care what bridge I burn.
I ask Dad all the time, I have inheritance.
You never give it to you? Like that's, there's
a jealousy between siblings.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah. So the jealousy word, I think, is key there. You heard it in the Rosario Butterfield thing too, when she said that Christians, she had like a little litany of things that she would describe, and one of them was fearful. And that's that they're fearful of other people, and over there, and I think that jealousy lives in that, where for whatever reason, and people kind of show anger towards things like that. Something Fred said earlier, it's like, that sounds very Lutheran. I meant to clarify what that means, because it does sound very Lutheran. And yeah, this class has heard me say this over and over again, but it's theology of the cross, that we have such confidence in what Jesus has done that we can call things just what they are. That there is suffering is suffering, bad is bad, good is good, like that's, and it doesn't have to be any more than that. And what Luther says is a theologian of glory then is always trying to interpret like the tea leaves of what God is doing type of thing. And what that ends up doing to us is that we end up, the way we do evangelism is, well, I'm only going to show this person love so that they'll become. Like it's all these other motivations to do this stuff, rather than like, I can just show this person grace and love. I I have enough confidence and fearlessness of the faith that I can disagree with this person and still have a good conversation with them. You know, like and I don't feel like I have to convert them. You know, and yeah, it's not our job. And that was something that he really says at the beginning of his book. It's kind of like leaning onto the grace of God and just giving Jesus the rest of it. You know, where it's our job to be those grace dispensers.
Don't you think a lot of time they show the love, but they feel they have to get into forgiveness because that's just ingrained in us.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
I mean, like, we can't just, like with Rosario, you show love, we say we love you, nice, but then you try to kind of get it over to, you know, God will forgive you even no matter what.
Yeah.
Because that's been ingrained in us for so long. Like, we need, like, whenever they have evangelism things, somehow you have to get into that.
Yeah. Well, and I think if you're giving forgiveness as a gift and not as a you gotta do X, Y, and Z type of thing, like it's like that, you know, it's like giving that grace. We keep going back to the word grace.
Expectation.
Yeah, like that's, you know, but like if you're presenting forgiveness as, you know, you got to change everything, and you'll finally get it. You know, you'll finally get into the land flowing with milk and honey, type of thing. Like, yeah, I don't know. I thought that interview with Rosario was good.
Law and gospel, you know, if you say you have to ask for forgiveness, that's law. That's not love.
Yeah. That's a good. It's the good Lutheran perspective.
Even though you know you need to get there, like she said, she loved her sin. You know, she didn't think her life was a wreck when they first met. And if you start saying, you know, what you're doing is wrong, I mean, I've done this. You know, judging people. You shouldn't be doing that, especially like family members. You know, and that's not love. But yeah, you don't. The different. And what did she say? Loving the sinner doesn't mean you're condoning the sin. She said it differently, though.
Yeah.
You know, that they understand that I don't love you because I agree with what you're doing.
The difference between acceptance and approval.
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah, I liked that.
Yeah, Fred.
I find it very easy to like be forgiving and loving to maybe my cousin who is a lesbian or something. But for somebody like a Muslim terrorist, I don't like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that's where it's so hard. That's where it's so hard. Where like, and that's where this stuff becomes complex. And you remember our gospel lesson from Sunday was Jesus saying to love our enemies. You know, that's a very, very astute word, very particular word there. And that's hard. I mean, even the 23rd Psalm is talking about our enemies and dinners and all those things. You know, like this has been a consistent God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob way of talking about it for a very long time. And it's not easy. So I want to look at one other thing, and it's a different way of showing love. And you can open your Bibles if you'd like to Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17, and we'll also do it on the screen. We'll listen to it on the screen as well. But I figured you guys would like to follow along with this one. Let's see. Oh, I got to actually hit the right buttons. Got to hit the right buttons, everyone. Let's see. Here we go. So let's see. Where are we going to start? Let's start at verse 16, and we'll go through probably 28. So we'll listen here.
Now while Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. Therefore he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and with the Gentile worshippers, and in the marketplace daily with those who happened to be there. Then certain Epicurean and Stoic philosophers encountered him.
What does this babbler want to say? He seems to be a proclaimer of foreign gods.
They said this because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection. And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus.
May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak? For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore, we want to know what these things mean.
For all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus.
Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the objects of your worship, I even found an altar with this inscription: To the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship without knowing, him I proclaim to you. God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands, as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring.
Okay. All right. So what's the interesting thing that Paul did there? Like, what do you think? What's going on?
I thought it was interesting, this Bible says, where that talked about the Gentiles, this one said devout persons.
Oh, huh. That's interesting.
I thought that was, it said Gentile worshipers, and this says devout persons.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So what else did okay, is everyone pretty familiar with this story? Yeah, like that's a little bit? Like that's so where is Paul? Like that's Athens, like it's like epicenter of Greek thought. You know, like that, especially during this time. So he is not around Hebrews. He's firmly using his name Paul rather than Saul, right? Like that's like he's firmly in these Greek realms, and he's like preaching about Christ and crucified and risen again, and all these things. But what really lands is he does something I would say is a little scandalous. And what does he do that's scandalous?
Yeah.
So this idol that you're worshiping.
Yeah.
You know whose God that is.
Think about what he does.
The unknown God is my God.
Yeah. Like he goes, I've been walking around here, and you guys have this idol. Like I know who this is. Like he connects God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jesus, who died and rose again, who it was such a big deal when the Pharisees would bring Jesus up a coin with a Roman Caesar on it. They're like, should we use this? And the reason why they're talking about that, because the Jews viewed that as idolatry, because the humans are in the image of God, and you're not allowed to have an inscription, especially on money. Oh my goodness, that's idolatry. Like that was the crux of that deal. Why they're so upset. And Paul, who was a Pharisee of Pharisees, remember, he's now going and looking at the idolatry and the other things of that culture and almost joining to it. Like
he's meeting them where they are.
Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah.
He's not saying you're wrong. He's like, think of it this way.
Yeah. Like the missing piece of a puzzle.
Yeah, which is interesting. And it's celebrated so much so that it's in the book of Acts. Like that thing is celebrating. And I look at the history of the Christian church, like we just finished last week, we had a Christmas tree sitting right over there. We had a Christmas tree in the sanctuary. That stuff's not in the Bible. Like that's it's not there. That was something where Christians went into Northern Europe and grabbed a celebration that had nothing to do with Christianity and rubbed Jesus all over it, so much so that we all put one in our house, unless you're lazy.
Did they also do that kind of with feast days and stuff? Mm-hmm. Sometimes they would pick a day that the pagans celebrated something. Yeah.
Tons of that. And rub Jesus all over it and change an entire culture. We have such a rich history of that. And the exciting thing to me is like, how can stuff like that be done today? Where what's going on around us that we might, and it's hard today. It's really hard because there's a lot of people that are super righteous that don't want you to do anything like that because it's a desecrating God and all that stuff. By all those people's standards, Paul is desecrating God in Acts. Like he connected him to the idolatry of things, but we will read that and we see like, oh man, look at what he did. Like
he was so strong, though, in his own faith.
Yeah. Like Paul, he had so much confidence in the death and resurrection of Jesus that he knew that it was going to prevail over anything else. And so as we talk about and look at giving grace to other people, like think about what Paul did. Think about what Peter did. Think about what happened to Rosario Butterfield or with Christopher Hitchens there and Dr. Dawkins Collins. That's we think about those stories, and then the stories all around us, and there may be inklings of like, well, I got to make sure that I'm pure here, but Paul wasn't that pure in that, but yet he was doing the right thing.
Well, and that reminds me of that joining Jesus on his mission.
Yeah,
Greg
Finke.
Yeah, but that Jesus is already there working. Mm-hmm. You're not bringing him in there. He's there.
He's already there.
So you don't have to have all the words. You don't have to say the perfect thing, and that's freeing in itself.
Yeah.
To just be yourself. You are who you are. Jesus knows he's going to put you in that situation, and just trust him that I don't have to.
Yeah.
I just have to be there. I just show up and show up.
Mm-hmm. Jesus is already working. He's already working.
It goes back to show by your example, and if necessary, use words.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you could see like with your friend, with neighbor Nelson, which Nelson actually came to one of the Bible studies here. I probably worried him a little bit about some stuff.
On the spot with his Catholicism.
But it's like I see Nelson a good amount, like all that stuff, like that's. But it's you look and you can see Jesus, especially the way Ed outlines it. You could see Jesus working in him, through the whole time, and we can come in and just move around and show grace and
Can I make a comment about Rosario?
Yeah.
I thought it was so interesting, the part where they talked about how they prayed.
Mm-hmm.
That to me, I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
That was just.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like Jesus. I could just see Jesus smiling when that happened.
Yeah. Like that's, and so you have so her story's kind of fascinating, and all those good things. But so good food for thought. The next section that we're going through is section 2 in the book. I really enjoyed reading that. Of course, you don't have to, but I thought it was good. And that video is pretty good too. But I appreciate everyone like having good discussion today and discussing all these things. And for everyone that's watching the pre-recorded stuff on YouTube, thanks for joining us.